flying so low. I'm like Kong in Doctor Strangelove, flying below the Russian radar and not getting hit by any missiles that would keep a person from delivering the package, the bomb. So, we have some interesting stories here today to go over. Hopefully, Lexi will be back next week with me, and I won't have to talk to myself alone. That I mean, I talk to myself a lot, but usually there are people there snoring. So anyway, we're going to get started. We've got quite a few things to talk about. Some things that I think are interesting, specifically to my experience as an administrator, as somebody who has worked with young people for a long time. It's very easy to seem somewhat pessimistic in society today, and I think a lot of times it's easy to be misunderstood. What our thoughts are concerning so many issues that are out there. I really don't find myself to be pessimistic, but I am aware there are a lot of things that are happening right now in the world. So many of them concern young folks. And so we have to worry about those things and we have to be on guard. It's so easy to get caught up in things where we feel like the world's just clicking away like it did when we were kids. And it's not. It's amazing, actually, how much it has changed in the last probably 15 years. I noticed when I graduated high school, went to college, came back to the same school I had graduated from to do my student teaching, and I noticed a difference then, just in young people. Uh, Not that young people are inherently evil by any stretch. Young people are a microcosm of what we are as adults. And as adults, I have found more and more that we tend to get away with what we can a lot of times. It's just like if you have a dress code at a school. So many times it's so difficult as an administrator to enforce the dress code because it's not the young person that you're going to be dealing with. It's the young person's parent. They're the ones that are going to come down and complain. And they'll have any number of reasons why they don't like the dress code. Well, it's difficult to find the clothes. It's uh, maybe more expensive to have to purchase certain clothes, or your kids won't fit in if they wear certain clothes or whatever. I don't think it's inherent in anybody in today's society to accept rules for the sake of the rule. I think it's become much more accepted that we try to break the rules. I think that is where we're at as a society. So we shouldn't be surprised when we have young people who try to break the rules. Because again, so many times the people who are the biggest advocate for the young person breaking the rule is the parent first, and in some instances, the system. In some instances, the system encourages breaking rules. I've had students who uh, I knew, and I'm not going to get into any specific instance, not a specific school or anything. I've worked with the school. I've worked with the Chickasaw Nation for a while, for a little bit of time. That was years ago, dealing with emancipated teens or young people who were trying to be. So I've seen things from maybe a little different angle than some folks. I have been in situations where I knew a kid would test positive, and in this situation, it was marijuana. And the young man told me he would. The student was honest with me. And amazingly, after testing positive, two witnesses, it was later discovered that, well, he wasn't positive after all. Well, that's hard to imagine since I saw the test. Now, what I'm saying here is that this is not everybody, it's not the system in itself. Typically, it's individuals within the system who stand to gain something from the decision that they make. And we just have to be aware that that's what's going on. So we have at least two stories here that we'll get to, and possibly three. The first story is, and I've got a couple of these off of CBN. Again, I'm not a 700 Club guy, but some of the news stories are rather good. And one that I had here is the one we'll begin with. Very high, very fast. Teens are vaping super potent marijuana, and parents are often clueless. And this is a story by Lori Johnson. After we get through that story, we're going to talk a little bit about a story here where we have a pastor terrorized, arrested for reading the Bible aloud, scores complete victory. And this happened sometime back in 2022. And this pastor, Pastor Matthew Meineke in Seattle, Washington, has just been essentially cleared of some charges here that he read the Bible out loud and was causing a disturbance. That's an interesting story I'd like to get to. If we have time, we may get to one more. I don't know if we'll have time or not, but we're going to go on and get started here. So let's go with our first story. Very high, very fast. Teens are vaping super potent marijuana and parents are often clueless. Story by Lori Johnson. And it's interesting here because I'm not a expert in any way concerning drugs. Probably, as I would talk about this, I would think that there might be people who would listen that know more about it than me, and would probably find that I even have anything to say about it laughable. So I can only speak from my experience, and I think that's fairly extensive. I didn't have anything to do with drugs in any way until I started working in the Trails program years ago. And that program was geared around young people who were in trouble, who came from homes where things were not good. And I really enjoyed my time there, but it was a very depressing place to be because you constantly were dealing with young folks who were really in trouble. Dealing with issues concerning drugs a lot of times, but even alcohol or abusive situations, just different things. So my time there, I think, prepared me for what was coming later in my life. But being an administrator at an alt ed program, you get to know what's happening in the life of your students, possibly a little more than if you're dealing in a larger environment. And you may be running 20 to 30 students at any given time. Now, that's the program I was involved with, fairly small. But there are programs, of course, smaller than that. There are programs larger than that. But as an administrator, I would deal with quite a few different situations that were eye-opening and became aware of certain things just by being around students and doing a little bit of research to kind of have an idea of what a person would be dealing with a lot of times. There were different situations that would occur where obviously you want to know what's going on. I remember my first year dealing with a overdose situation. Not and this student did not was not incapacitated, but they were on whatever it was they were on. It took them to a really bad place, and we had to deal with that in house. So so by overdose, I don't mean necessarily even really an overdose, but definitely taking something that, while it didn't incapacitate them, it definitely took them where you don't want to have to deal with it. It was a very bad situation, potentially dangerous situation for the student. This article talks quite a bit about this, and it's interesting to me that people are so easily fooled. We seem to think that teenagers, number one, what they do is maybe they smoke a little pot or experiment, but it's not that big of a deal. We tend to substitute that today, I believe, for what alcohol was probably when I was in school. You know, I back when I was in school, and I wasn't a big party guy at all, but back when I was in school, it seemed like you might have had a handful of people who would do anything concerning even marijuana. You had a lot of people who would drink. Drinking was kind of the rite of passage at the time. Now, it would be interesting to see a statistic on how many people who started at that age still have alcohol problems, or alcohol was a gateway drug that led to other things. Now, and I know a lot of people will say, well, alcohol's not a gateway drug. Well, absolutely, alcohol can be a gateway drug. The whole thing about a gateway drug, the whole idea of what a gateway drug is, it's anything that weakens your resolve to say no. Because once you take something that's harder, the odds are, if you're inclined to be a person who is addictive to anything, once you step up the game, it's very hard to go back to the way things were. And that's in any kind of addiction. It's especially that way when we're talking about drugs, where you're actually putting something in your body, oftentimes to the point that your body becomes dependent on that substance or chemical. So when we look at this, it says teenagers are participating in a dangerous trend that's sweeping the nation. Growing number of America's youths, even as young as 11 years old, are vaping THC, the ingredient in marijuana that makes a person high. Now, it's interesting to me that this story came out on 9/17, and we're talking to people like they have no clue, which is probably a good way to approach the story. But this has been going on for a long time. In Oklahoma, marijuana has been medicinal for medicinal purposes, has been legal for several years now. Had a lot of issues from it, but this is nothing that's new, and we're talking about it like it is new. It says the most recent CDC figures available show more than 1 in 5 high school seniors vaped THC in 2020, which was a significant increase over prior years. Now, I will tell you that that's just high school seniors. If you look at the overall numbers of people who are teens, and we would even say preteens, the number's more like 1 in 7. 1 in 7. And and that study was specifically in the last month, not the last year, the last month, 1 in 7. So this surpasses people who are just experimenting. For a couple of comparisons, the Recovery Research Institute put out a little bit of information, but on a study that they did. But for a person who has a problem, we consider a problem pre-addictive behavior, addictive behavior, whatever they're doing. So the average age for a drinker, someone who is consuming alcohol, and they have a problem. We call them a problem drinker. Well, the average age for that begins at 19. 19. I'm talking about a little bit older. The average age for a smoker, somebody who's using specifically marijuana, the average age for that is 17. That's 2 years earlier than a 19-year-old, obviously, Captain Obvious. But the thing that you have to understand, you can almost look at that in dog years when you're concerning the developmental ability of a teenager. 17 to 19 is a much bigger difference than at that age than maybe 30 to 40 when you get older. 2 years makes a big difference, especially in the development of a young person, development of the mind. So what we see here is that smokers, people who are experimenting with marijuana, just to use the term smoker, we kind of lump them all into one thing, but that is a group that you're looking at starting at the age of 17. And I'm telling you, if they don't stop, if it's not just something they experimented with, but they keep doing that, a lot can change in 2 years from 17 to 19. A lot can change. You can move ahead pretty quickly in whatever it is that you're addicted to. And one of the most popular things that people will do are dabs, use diamond. And diamond can be, to give you an idea, it's THC kind of contained in wax, for example. And you put that in what they call a nail, or it would be what you would melt it in to smoke it or ingest it, however you do that. So you've got this dab. Now, depending on what you're getting, a dab will have variants of THC. What you would typically get out of a joint would be maybe 10%, maybe 15% THC. That would probably be, for a joint, I'm guessing, probably fairly stout. I don't know what people are doing now, but I would say it'd be fairly stout. But with a dab, you can get that when you're talking about a diamond, you get that up to 99% THC. 99%, 95% THC that can be ingested through a pipe or a rig, what you would use. So when you're talking about 99% THC, if you're talking about a young person or any person, you could be 50 years old. You could have smoked pot all your life. Well, you're 50 years old and you're smoking pot all your life. You're probably, your tolerance is up there. But, it doesn't really matter where you're at. You go from whatever you've normally been using to 95%, and you're going to be on your backside for a while. There's just no way that you can do that and it not have an effect on you. Matter of fact, there are psychoactive effects that can take place for folks who are doing that amount, where it can really mess with your mind, almost psychotic. There was a young man, I believe it was 20, maybe 2019, in Norman, Oklahoma. They had the video come out, and the video was this young man. He literally pushes over a stop sign in the grocery store parking lot, and a lady's walking out with her baby in the child seat in the cart, and he grabs the baby, just like not anything, and slams this child down into the pavement. And the only thing that kept the child from being seriously injured was that this child was strapped into the baby's seat. This young man was on marijuana, and at the time they said it was laced with something. It's fairly early on. It'd be interesting to know exactly what that was laced with, but that's the kind of thing that you see in even a psychotic episode a lot of times. If somebody all of a sudden goes to an amount they're not used to. I remember one time we had a lady who came in and she was getting her child, and she was talking about how she had tried some 95%, and she said she was out for 3 days. Now, I don't know that. It was a that was a bizarre conversation, but I have no way to validate that. But I will tell you, there are some examples of those types of things happening. And I think with the legality of it from a medicinal standpoint, it's become more accepted. But it would be interesting to do a study, even just here in Oklahoma, to find out how many people are really using marijuana and THC for medicinal purposes compared to how many are using the excuse of medicinal purposes to use it recreationally. Recently we voted on recreational marijuana and it didn't pass. But it need to pass because people are already using it recreationally. So we already see that. So it says many parents may know THC is the main psychoactive compound in marijuana. They don't realize vaping it is much more potent than smoking a joint. Unlike typical marijuana cigarettes that contain 10% THC, which we already talked about, but said today's new THC vaping devices can concentrate it to a staggering 95%. Nora Valkow, MD, director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, she says that this kind of consumption can cause serious mental issues. The higher the dose of THC, for example, the higher the likelihood that you will end up with psychotic episode, and that will lead you to end up in the emergency room department. That's a very scary experience. The higher the content of the THC, the higher the risk of becoming addicted to marijuana and to THC. And that in turn results in a disruptive behavior that can be very long lasting. So, all of that's common sense. The more you do of anything, the more you want to do of that thing. And quite frankly, the more you do of anything, the more it takes to get the same feeling that you had before. That's the nature of addiction, of anything. But it says further complications include stomach issues such as cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. It talks about that there are other actions a drug could interfere with cardiac function, pulmonary function, irrigation of blood to the brain. All these are a new presentation that physicians are seeing in the emergency department associated with consumption of high-level THC that we actually didn't even know existed. So that tells you right there that to ingest high levels of THC at that amount, things are happening that people don't even know. Things are happening that people don't even really understand. Because it's not really been studied to that extent yet that you could make even an educated guess as to what's going to happen. At some point, it seems like, to me, an outsider looking in, some of the things that are happening with marijuana is making it almost like it's just as hard a drug as anything else out there, if you're not really careful. They talked to a young man who was talking about the effects of drugs. And I'm not going to read his part because I can tell you exactly the effects of the drug from my perspective. I have seen young people who were full of life, who were very intelligent, who had great ability, and they wound up using to the point that they were almost like a zombie. And by that, I mean there's just no life in them. They don't care anymore about their grades. Their friend group changes dramatically. Many times they'll want to participate in certain activities, athletics or whatever. But when it comes to working hard, they just don't have it. They don't have it anymore to do that. Now, some people will do it. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that everyone on an athletic team is squeaky clean. That's not what I'm saying. Athletics is not the cure-all for people doing bad things. But I will tell you that typically somebody who's doing it a lot is not going to be very active in that regard. Uh, a person's ability to stay on task, to even care, really starts to go down. And I will tell you, one of the things that's a problem with that is the way that kids have access to information now. You get in a conversation with a young person uh, over THC, over drug use, and all of the descriptors that I just gave you, they will tell you that that's non-existent. Oh no, you can be okay. Studies show that it doesn't have this effect. You could go to a website where they're distributing marijuana, and they're going to tell you everything that they perceive to be good about it, and they're going to embellish that that line. They're going to tell you that there's no proof that anything's wrong. You can do anything you want, that sort of thing. But I will tell you from firsthand experience dealing with young people, that's not the case. Now, the truth is that there's a lot of reasons why it's so common today. And one of the things here that was brought up in the story is that a loophole in the 2018 Farm Bill, which legalized hemp, also legalized Delta 8 THC vape products, which are synthesized from hemp. So when you look, for example, in Oklahoma, that's legal. And that means you can sell it in most smoke shops, even some gas gas stations, convenience stores, that sort of thing. Now, to what extent, I don't know. Maybe you can go buy whatever anywhere you want to go, and maybe you can't. I don't go buy it. I didn't do extensive research over this. But I will tell you that if it's like anything else, there are a lot of people that'll get their hands on it that shouldn't. If you have brothers and sisters and they're doing that stuff, it's much easier for a younger person to do it. You know, they say that some of the folks who start doing this, they have had folks as young as age 11 who are doing this stuff. So if the average is 15, that among teens, the average is 15 among teens, then you either have a much larger number of 13-year-olds doing this than 19-year-olds, or you've got to throw some 11-year-olds in there, some 12-year-olds who we would consider preteen to balance that age out to the age of 15. So you're going to have a lot of younger people starting this stuff. So you can't have a fifth grade student anymore and think my fifth grader's never going to have opportunity to be exposed to these things. As I've known of situations where you'll have a kid in an elementary school setting who maybe would bring something from home. Not that and again, maybe the kid who's in an elementary school setting's doing that, or maybe not. It may just be a matter of curiosity, and they have whatever it is, and they got it from their older brother or their mother or father. I've had taken alcohol from students who were stealing it from their parents and bringing it to a school. So there's any number of situations that you can get in, right? But we do have to admit here that we're talking about folks at a fairly young age a lot of times. So when we look at something like this and we see how easy it is to get because of things like this loophole in this farm bill, so we got to understand kids are able to get this anywhere. And now you have all these flavors. I mean, everything from strawberry to bubble gum. A lot of this stuff is scentless. It has no scent. Sometimes you can't smell it. There's they there are even hoodies that the string on the hoodie is a vape. I don't know if they still make those, but that was an issue. There are vapes that look like pens, you know, cartridges. You have to be very vigilant as a parent. You have to be very vigilant as a teacher. This young man that they talked to in this article was talking about how he would do it in class. And if he couldn't do it in class, he was looking for the next opportunity to go to the restroom. And I would tell you, the building I was in, if you didn't curtail it, you would have a steady stream of young people going to the restroom. You got some people who need to all of a sudden go to the restroom 2 and 3 times in the same hour. We're all suffering from the tiny bladder syndrome all of a sudden. When more than likely it has something to do with this. But I would just close this out with this because I do have what I think is a bit of a solution. There's not any guaranteed solution. You would have to legislate a real solution, and that's never going to happen. We live in a society that's so consumed with greed, and if there's a dollar to be made, we justify it. When we voted for the legalization of medicinal marijuana, one of the things that you would hear all the time here in the state of Oklahoma is, well, people are doing this stuff anyway. The government might as well make some money off of it. And based on that kind of thinking, if that's really your MO, that's where you're going, then you might as well legislate, and I'm not trying to be crass, but you might as well legislate prostitution. You might as well legislate harder drugs. You might as well legislate any number of vices. I don't know why we would just allow the tribes to have gambling. If we have it, why isn't the state having gambling? I mean, of course we do. We have a lottery. Now, I'm not advocating these things, obviously. This is not my stand on the issue. I think we should do away with a lot of this stuff. I'm just saying that once you start going based on the financial end of it, that opens the door to doing a lot of things. If finances dictate your morality, that's an issue. But it says here, Newcomb says, if a child is vaping THC, the sooner the parent discovers the problem and intervenes, the better. A couple of things, which is obviously true. But this says when they are this young, because I've heard of 11-year-olds using this as they're entering into the 5th, 6th grade. It's really decisive action. You need to act really fast. And if you're waiting till the first time you've caught your child doing something, this is just advice for you. If you're waiting till you've caught your child in the act, you're waiting too long. Because when you talk about addictive behavior, if your child happens to be an individual who has an addictive personality, the first time that they're introduced to anything could be too long. The first time they're introduced to pornography, back when I was, my kids were small, obviously, cell phones were coming out. And think about the ramifications of that the way that I probably should have. Now, I don't think that we had a big problem with it in my home. However, I will tell you this. I do think it's created a problem later on for the addictive nature of just having that constantly flipping through something. I see it in my own life. It's very easy. You get on Facebook, get on Instagram. You want to know what's going on. You're flipping through this thing. You're flipping through this thing. Those endorphins are working. Those pleasure sensors in your brain. It doesn't just have to be through gambling or something pornographic. It doesn't have to be through drug use or alcohol use. It could be something as simple as Instagram. I got to see what the next picture is. I got to see what it's kind of like the pulling the lever on a slot machine. It's what's entertaining you. And we need more of that in your mind. That's what you're thinking. So we understand that young folks are starting this. If you wait till the first time you catch them, it's too long. So I have a couple of things that I would note that I think would be good. Number one, if you're a parent that just doesn't have, and at this point, I don't know how many of those folks are out there that just has no knowledge about anything to do with marijuana use. This is a proactive thing that you can do. I would say that drug testing your child is a good thing. Now, I know that there are issues with that, and people say, well, then my kid won't think that I trust them. Your kid may not think that you trust them, and then again, as they get older, they may think that, well, my parents love me and they didn't want me to get caught in things. You have to understand, young people have to understand, especially when you're dealing in a state like Oklahoma where you have medicinal marijuana. Some of these candies and things that people have, and the gummies and things, you don't know what anybody's giving you. So anytime anybody would want to give you anything, if it's a package that hasn't been opened, I wouldn't even trust that. To me, that's a no-brainer. That's common sense at this point. But young people aren't always using common sense. So you can approach that from the perspective that if for your child that, hey, I don't know, I don't know what you're doing at school, and I don't know what your friends are doing. I don't know what your friends are giving you. I don't know if you're sharing candy or whatever, or different kinds of drinks. You know, you got your Powerade or whatever, and what's in that. We have powders now that we put in water and things. We don't know what, you know, if we're putting something in something, we have an understanding of what that is. But if you're just taking that from somebody and, hey, let me have a drink of whatever, let me have a piece of candy, you don't know what that is. That's not always a given. So it's about awareness. You know, if I find something that's in my child's, it's in their urine, then I want to test that. I want to make sure what's going on. It very well could be an honest situation. So this is how this ties in to the things that I jotted down. Number one, know your kids' friends. Know your kids' friends. This is something people have been saying forever, and it's common sense, but know your kids' friends. And I would add to that, don't trust your kids' friends. We go back to Leave It to Beaver years ago, and Eddie Haskell was a scoundrel. And I mean, at the time, we think of Eddie Haskell as a scoundrel because Eddie Haskell was always saying, hi, Mr. and Mrs. Cleaver or whatever. And then behind the back, he's telling Wally, hey, don't listen to your parents. We don't care what they say. We're going to go whatever. We're going to the movies. We're watching The Wolfman or whatever wild thing they were doing back in those days. But folks, your kids' friends, they may act one way. Their parents may act one way. And unless it's somebody that you just know like the back of your hand, you really don't ever know what's going on in a home. You don't ever know what the situation could lead to. Just not even thinking about addictive behavior, but just protecting your children. I think the time of sleepovers, unfortunately, unless it's somebody that, man, if my kids were small today, I don't know whose house they would stay at. Not that there aren't people that I trust, but when it comes to your children, you don't know what people are doing anymore. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. So know your kids' friends, know what they're doing, know what they're into. Pay attention to your kids' behavior and your child's behavior and your child's friends' behavior. What are they looking at? Are they looking a little suspicious over there? Are their eyes, are they sleepy? Are they sleepy all the time? Those kids, it's like a Seinfeld episode. Do they say man a lot? Are they saying man? But in all seriousness, know your kids' friends and don't trust your kids' friends. It doesn't mean you don't let your child hang out with them, but don't trust them. Number two, talk to your children. And by that, I don't mean talk to your children like when they come home. Did you see drugs at school today, Billy? That's not what I'm telling you. Did you see anybody with methamphetamine today? That's not, you're talking to a third and fourth grader and they're coming home and you're going, did you see marijuana? That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about having a relationship with your children. I'm talking about they don't want to, that they may tell you they want to sit in front of that video game. And if you start things out in that way and let the video game be their babysitter, that's the relationship you'll have. But be active with your kids. Get them out of the house, do things with them. My kids, we did quite a bit of stuff together. And I look back on it now and I would have done some things. Obviously, everybody would do this, but I would do some things differently. Some of the time we spent doing certain activities that I look back and think, well, that really wasn't that worthwhile. There were other things that we could have done, but we don't. We have is the one shot, right? But talk to your children. Develop a rapport with your child. Develop common interest, whatever those things are, and be active in your child's life in that way. That way, when the conversation does need to happen about drugs or about inappropriate behavior concerning the internet, uh, you know, uh, pornography is it's just through the roof right now. How many young people are into that? When those conversations need to take place, it's going to be a whole lot easier for you to have those conversations if you talk to your children all the time in general. You never have much of a conversation. It would be a shame for your child when they're 30 years old to say the first time my dad or my mom ever really talked to me about anything was when they thought I was involved in something where maybe I'd smoked something I shouldn't or looked at something I shouldn't. That's you want that relationship. You want that relationship. The third thing that I would tell you is give them reasonable choices. Give them reasonable choices. Now, there's something that can happen because that pendulum swings. If I'm saying no, no, no all the time, and the pendulum on my end is swinging that way to the no, I don't care what they're asking. Can I do this? Can I do that? Can we go here? Can we go? It's always no. That when they have time to get out on their own, or when they're not where you can see what they're doing, the odds are that they're going to go completely the other way and do everything. They're going to do everything you've not allowed them to do a lot of times. And this is the best kid. I'm not talking about a kid here even that's just a bad kid. But nobody wants to be told no all of the time. And one way as a parent that we can avoid saying no is to say, well, I don't want you to do that, but here are some other choices. If there's a party going on that you just think is ridiculous and you don't want your kid there, then say, you know what, I really don't want you going to that party tonight. But tomorrow night, how would you like to do XYZ? Would you like to go with your friend so and so to the movie? Would you like to, can I, give you a few bucks and maybe you can go shop, at the mall? Whatever. I mean, some of that stuff could be limited. Maybe it's just going, maybe it's you and your son going camping, or you and your daughter going camping or something, or going fishing, doing something. Get it, you know, well, I don't want you doing that, but there's this. And then let them pick. And I'll tell you why. It's a good way for a young person to start developing the ability to solve open-ended questions and to make choices. And it's a good way for a young person to understand that my parents truly care about me and they're not just saying no all the time. Now, am I saying that every time you do that, your kid's going to go, man, I'm thrilled. I'm so excited that you're not letting me do what I wanted to do, but you've given me 3 choices here. No, they're not always going to be excited about that. But it does give them an out. It gives them something that they can do. It gives them something that they can enjoy, that you can go along with. It is a healthy compromise. We're not talking here about an unhealthy compromise where you're giving in, but we're talking about a healthy compromise. Give them reasonable choices. And the last thing I would say is that your kids are not yours. Your children do not belong to you. I'm talking out here to Christian parents. We understand our kids are not our own. We have something in the church called the baby dedication. And of course, the baby dedication is just simply that. We dedicate our child to the Lord. Now, what does that mean? That means that I have made a vow as a parent, not the child. I have made a vow as a parent to, within the best of my ability, to raise my child in a godly manner. I don't think enough Christians take that seriously today. We don't take it serious enough. We need to, because our child is not our own. Our child is a gift from God. That's what makes abortion so terrible. Our child is a gift from God, and we are stewards of our children for a period of time until they go out and start making decisions for themselves. So we have to remember our kids are not our own, they're God's. So the greater responsibility here is that we should have a relationship with our children. We should put out the effort to give them reasonable choices. We should put out the effort to know their friends. We should put out the effort to find a way to, if it means I'm going to just drug test every one of my kids, it's just a blanket thing. Everybody knows I'm going to do it. And I'm drug testing them, you know, and I don't ever give them a set time, obviously, but when you're talking about something like marijuana, that can be in your bloodstream. That can be in your, not bloodstream, but your urine. Well, bloodstream, but your urine for up to 4 to 6 weeks. That's extreme. Typically, by the end of 30 days, it's kind of wearing out. And there's things that kids will do that's crazy to try to get that out of their system. But understand something: your kids, they belong to the Lord. If you're a Christian parent, they belong to the Lord. So you're not just being a steward over something that belongs to you. Sometimes we take care of our things not as well. But when something belongs to God, I would think that we would take better care of it, the best care of it that we can. But parents, this is something to be aware of in the world we're living in. These things are out there, so we just need to be aware of what's going on. Now to the next story. Pastor terrorized and arrested for reading the Bible aloud scores complete victory. This is a story by Billy Hollowell, and it's about a Washington pastor, a pastor in Seattle. My son, he did a mission trip in Seattle several years ago. This was prior to the pandemic, and he said it was almost in a religious sense, in a Christian sense. Now, I don't mean as far as the civilization goes, but and what they have access to or anything like that, but in a very real Christian perspective, he said it was much like a third world country. He said it was very much a post-Christian place to be. We understand that that's kind of the nature of what's happening in the world, which is unfortunate. But this pastor, Matthew Meineke, his battle against officials in Seattle, Washington recently came to a close. According to Nate Kellum, senior counsel at First Liberty Institute. The situation began on June 24th, 2022, but now it's resolved. So it says what had happened was the city of Seattle effectively made reading the Bible aloud a crime. And it first occurred on June 24th, 2022. I don't know if that date sticks out to you, but that was the date that the U.S. Supreme Court rendered the Dobbs decision. It was a decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. Meineke was reportedly preaching during a huge protest against the decision in downtown Seattle. And Kellum said that the preacher felt it would be a perfect opportunity to share the gospel. And let me tell you something, pastors and Christians. You look for the perfect opportunity to share the gospel, you better understand that comes at a price. Because people don't want to hear the gospel. A lot of times people are lost, do not want to hear the gospel. So when you get guys like Ray Comfort, people like that are out there, man, they're awesome. To be a street preacher like that, I'll be honest with you, that has not been what I felt my calling to be. But that doesn't mean it won't ever be that. But I admire those guys greatly to go out and do those things. But it says he took a Bible and he goes out there to read the Bible. He was very earnest, pro-life beliefs, but that was not his purpose. He really just wanted to share the gospel. Now, I wasn't there with this guy, so I don't know exactly what his perspective was. I have seen videos, though, and I've seen these guys, and a lot of times they go out and they're just sharing the gospel. But there's a vitriol, a hatred for that. Especially when you're dealing with something like the Dobbs decision, because people do not want to be told that what they're doing might be wrong. That would be interesting, because we keep hearing a lot when it comes to abortion about the number of instances of rape, the number of instances where there's a health risk to the mother. And I can tell you right now, most of the women and men who are out there protesting something like this, they're not thinking in those terms. Now, people could say whatever they want to say. I remember a time that a lot of young people that I've taught have no frame of reference for because they're not 52 going on 53 years of age. But I remember a time when the abortion discussion, when we talk about Roe v. Wade, the abortion discussion was, well, we need abortion in case of incest, rape, or health risk to the mother. And it was really frowned upon that would ever be a form of birth control. That was not what it was, according to anybody who was in support of Roe v. Wade. But now people are pretty open about that. It has become a form of birth control. Now I will tell you that I am against abortion at any time for any reason. I have my rationale for that, and it's biblical. At the same time, having a conversation about health risks to the mother, rape, or incest is a very different conversation than, well, it's a form of birth control. Because when human life to be disposed of is because it's an inconvenience to you, that's evil. And I don't care who that offends. That's evil. There is no justification for that. And if you rationalize that, then where does that end? Where does that end? You know, we look at the elderly. We look, or, you know, at what point do we say, at what age we start euthanizing people, which people are already arguing for. They talk about, well, we want to die with dignity. We want to, I just don't, I think that's a slippery slope that you go down in society that's just not a very good place to be. As image bearers of God, the difference between a human being and an animal is just that. You know, we have a soul. God created us as a very special creation. We're very different than other life. And so we should respect that. We should respect that. The interesting thing here, it says some protesters started to crowd in around him, started saying some inflammatory, derogatory things, and made him feel uncomfortable. So he moved off a few feet away to a new spot, but then at that spot, some protester grabbed his Bible and started ripping the pages out of it. And I got to tell you, I don't know. I don't know what I do there. I think this gentleman shows a great deal of restraint. He says, that's not all. Kellum said that the situation turned physical after Meineke grabbed another Bible and resumed reading. That's when he alleges Antifa members got involved. They started to pick up Pastor Meineke, and they carried him around a block before dropping him on the cement. Despite the pain and danger, Meineke found another spot and started preaching once more. That's when he was again confronted and reportedly knocked down. Kellum said the police intervened at that point, but rather than helping Meineke, they said he was the problem. Now, I think we forget something. It's called the First Amendment here. And reading your Bible, folks, that's not like yelling fire in a theater. Okay? People say a lot of things that I don't agree with. You have a right to protest. You have a right to we have a right to protest even if I don't agree with you. That's what we have. The rules got to be the same for everybody, right? But that means I have the right to be there as well and to voice my opinion. Now, if I start laying hands on somebody or calling people names or things that's inflammatory, it's one thing. But if my opinion is a legitimate opinion concerning the other side of any given issue, then I should have the right to say my piece wherever I'm at, as long as I'm doing that in a respectful manner. Somehow I have a feeling some of the things he was reading from the Bible weren't nearly as coarse or vulgar as some of the things that the protesters who were protesting the Dobbs decision were saying. I think this guy was probably speaking from a G-rated perspective comparatively. Kellum said the reason for the arrest was based on a policy the police had that if there was a hostile reaction to someone speaking, then that speaker would be asked to leave or stop their activity. That makes sense. I mean, you could just get the dog beat out of you, but evidently what we need to do here is throw you in jail. What are you out here getting beat up like this for? Don't you know better? You should be, at home. If you want to read your Bible, you should be at home. If the speaker, by the way, I wonder what would happen if somebody turned on one of the protesters. That's a no-win, isn't it? He shows up, he's going to read the Bible. He can't read the Bible. If he showed up and started trying to beat on a protester or something, which I would not advocate at all, that's not a good thing to do, but he's going to go to jail. He's going to go to jail if he reads his Bible, going to go to jail if he comes there. I guess it would just don't be down there. We don't need an opposing view. We need to just let one side dictate the narrative on any given situation, which, by the way, is what's happening in so much of our society today. We don't understand what a discourse is anymore. If the speaker refuses, as was reportedly the case with Meineke, then the person is seen as committing a crime. You have an opinion. Get out of here. Instead of dealing with the individuals who are actually committing crimes, they were focusing on a speaker who was really doing nothing wrong, but he was reading the Bible. So in a lot of people's mind, that's wrong. I'm running out of time, so I want to get down here to this. But it says, Kellum said Meineke's victory doesn't solve. It says it doesn't solve the problem for the preacher, but the police will also no longer be able to behave in a similar way in the future. Okay? Police have been put on notice that if someone is peaceably speaking, you need to acknowledge those rights. The attorney said you need to allow them to go forth with their First Amendment freedoms just like anyone else. It said Meineke discussed the alleged ordeal on Twitter. This is interesting. It says Seattle Police Department has enough resources to send 10 police officers to arrest a preacher reading his Bible in public park. Because it's such a horrible crime now. The man who goes by the Seattle Preacher on X included a video. And the video, it's unclear what happened before the clip, but one cop can be heard stating the individual reading scripture can no longer stay in his location. So at this point, and this is what the officer says, so at this point, we can no longer stand by the risk that you pose for public safety by remaining here. Can be mitigated if you leave. Your last chance. The preacher responds, I don't want to leave because I'm not in danger. That's when the authorities handcuff the individual identified in the press as Meineke, and the crowd erupts into cheers. Folks, this guy was in danger, but he's willing to hazard that in order to say the truth of the gospel in a hostile environment. And the thanks he gets is he gets taken to prison, he gets taken to jail, and he goes because he's created a dangerous environment. It sounds like the environment was dangerous for him. If he wants to hazard that, then that's on him. He has the freedom to do that. But I guess not in Seattle, which is another reason I'm thankful to be here in Oklahoma. Well, folks, that's the end of the Hired Gun podcast for this week. Hope that everybody gained something from it, enjoyed it. And until next time, I will see you later. And remember, the Word of God is a weapon. I'm out of here.